Have you ever woken up, opened your weather app out of habit, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature? The kind that creeps in when you realize the ground rules of your entire season may have just changed overnight? Because right now, something genuinely strange is happening in the Pacific Ocean, and it is making the people whose full-time job is to predict our weather sound almost uncertain. Not the usual hedge your bets meteorologist uncertainty. The kind of uncertainty you hear in a voice when someone looks at a map and realizes the old playbook might not apply this time. A Super El Niño is loading up for the winter ahead. The kind of event that has only shown up a handful of times in the modern record. And here's the part that makes this forecast feel truly weird. It is already breaking the rules before winter even begins. This is the story of what is happening in the ocean right now, why the incoming winter could end up being one people talk about for decades, and why even the best forecasters on the planet are watching this one with a mixture of excitement and something that looks a lot like nervousness. But before we dive in, do me a quick favor. If you love understanding the weather, the earth, and the forces that quietly run our lives, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with one person whose winter forecast you already know you will be discussing all season. It takes 2 seconds, it costs you nothing, and it genuinely helps me keep making deep dives like this one. Now let's talk about the giant engine that is about to drive this winter. To understand why this forecast matters so much, you have to understand what El Niño actually is, and I promise, this will not be a boring science lecture. Think of the Pacific Ocean as the biggest bathtub on the planet, roughly 10,000 miles wide and on average more than 2 miles deep. Normally, strong winds called trade winds blow from east to west across that tub, constantly shoving warm surface water toward Asia and Indonesia. That leaves the eastern Pacific, the water off the coasts of South and Central America, much cooler than it would otherwise be. Now imagine those trade winds suddenly weakening, or in some cases, flipping entirely. The warm water that was being piled up in the western Pacific starts sloshing back eastward like water in a bathtub when you tap the side. Huge areas of ocean surface warm up by 2, 3, even 4 degrees. And here's the key, that warm water does not just sit there looking pretty. It becomes a giant source of energy for the atmosphere above it. Warm water means rising air. Rising air means thunderstorms on a scale that can reorganize weather patterns for the entire planet. This is the El Niño Southern Oscillation, the heartbeat of the world's climate. It has been pulsing for as long as the oceans have existed, and every few years it shifts into its warm phase, which scientists call El Niño. The name comes from Spanish, and it means the Christ child, because fishermen off the coast of South America first noticed these strange warm currents arriving around Christmas time, hundreds of years before anyone understood what they were. Now we know they are not local quirks at all. They are planetary events. Most El Niños are moderate. They come, they rearrange the weather, they leave, but every couple of decades, the system really commits. You get a Super El Niño, an event so strong that its fingerprints show up on every continent, in the jet streams, in the storm tracks, in the headlines. And here's the part that is easy to glaze over, so pay attention for a second. That warm water in the eastern Pacific does not just change the weather in the countries next to it. It changes the weather everywhere. The atmosphere is a connected machine, and when an enormous patch of ocean suddenly starts pumping heat and moisture skyward, the ripple effects travel around the entire planet in the form of reshaped wind patterns. Meteorologists call what happens above a warm ocean the Walker circulation, a giant loop of rising air, flowing wind, and sinking air that normally operates in a careful balance. El Niño pushes that whole loop off balance, and the atmosphere responds by rewriting the position and strength of the jet streams that steer our storms. That is the mechanism. That is how a warm patch of water off Peru can end up dumping 3 feet of snow on New York City. Now you know the wiring. Let's look at what it actually did the last 2 times it ran at full power. Since modern record keeping began, we have only seen this level of intensity a small handful of times. The most recent examples were the winters of 1997 into 1998 and 2015 into 2016. And if you want to know what this coming winter could look like, those 2 seasons are the closest thing we have to a history book. So let's open that book. The winter of 1997 into 1998 is still one of the most notorious weather seasons in American history. California, which had been through years of drought, suddenly got hit by storm after storm after storm. Rivers jumped their banks. Hillsides that had stood for centuries let go and became mudslides. In the 10-county San Francisco Bay region alone, landslides caused more than $150 million in damage. And that was just one corner of one state. Total losses across the region ran into the billions, and the winter was nowhere near finished. In January of 1998, an ice storm of almost biblical proportions swept across eastern Canada and the northeastern United States. Ice built up on trees and power lines until branches snapped under the weight and transmission towers folded like paper clips. More than 4 million people in Canada lost power, and roughly 700,000 more lost it in the northeastern United States. Some of them did not get it back for weeks. In the worst-hit areas of Quebec, the lights stayed out for nearly a month. In the dead of a Canadian winter, entire cities went dark. Heating systems went silent. Water pipes froze solid in homes where families huddled in whatever warm room they could find, burning candles and wrapping themselves in every blanket they owned. Farmers milked cows by flashlight. Soldiers were deployed to knock ice off transmission towers and clear fallen lines. It remains one of the most destructive ice storms in North American history, and it was forever tied to the ocean thousands of miles away that had decided months earlier to run hot. Now fast forward to the winter of 2015 into 2016. Different ELT. Nino, same signature. The southern half of the country was hammered by storm after storm riding a supercharged stream of wind. And in January of 2016, everything lined up in the worst possible way. A monster blizzard buried the mid-Atlantic under up to 3 feet of snow. Washington, D.C. shut down. New York City shut down. And Central Park recorded 27.5 inches, the biggest snowstorm in the city's recorded history. Airports turned into parking lots for hundreds of thousands of stranded travelers. Cars disappeared under drifts for days. National Guardsmen were called out to dig out emergency routes. Major cities ground to a halt, not for hours, but for days. And the damage bill climbed past $500 million. That storm did not come from nowhere. It came from a Super El Niño that had been loading the southern storm track for months. The same kind of loading we are watching happen right now. Here is the pattern in those 2 winters. A Super El Niño does not just make the weather a little different. It redirects the entire storm machinery of the continent. The subtropical jet stream, a river of wind that normally sits far to the south, gets supercharged and swings northward across the United States. Think of it as a conveyor belt for storms, firing system after system across California, across the Southwest, across Texas, across the Gulf Coast, and up the eastern seaboard. Meanwhile, the northern tier of the country tends to sit under milder, quieter air, because the cold is being blocked from diving south as often or as early as usual. More storms in the south means more rain, more flooding, more severe weather outbreaks in places that normally think of tornado season as a spring thing. And when a cold air mass happens to be sitting in the right place at the right moment, a storm lifting up the coast can collide with it and produce the kind of snow event that names itself and gets remembered for decades. That is the loaded weapon sitting in the forecast for this winter. So far, so normal. This is the standard story forecasters tell when a strong El Niño is on the way. But here is where this forecast turns weird. Remember that history book I mentioned? This El Niño seems to have read it and decided to ignore it. Let's look at the numbers, because this is where the forecast turns genuinely strange. The El Niño that is forming right now got going fast. As of the middle of August 2026, the key ocean temperature measure in the Central Pacific, what scientists call the Nino 3.4 region, has already climbed to roughly 2.7 degrees Celsius above normal. To understand why that number matters, you need to know what typical looks like. A moderate El Niño might push that region 1 degree above normal. A strong event at its full peak usually gets to around 2 degrees. 2.7 is in territory that the modern record has only seen at the very peak of the 2 most extreme events ever measured. And we are seeing it now before autumn has even started. The forecasters' models have been scrambling to catch up all summer. The official outlook now calls for better than a 90% chance of a very strong El Niño persisting through the fall and into the winter, with some windows putting the odds of peak intensity in that range as high as they ever get. That alone would be remarkable. But the strangeness goes deeper. This El Niño is arriving right on the heels of a La Niña, the opposite phase, the cool phase of the same ocean heartbeat. La Niña conditions were in place through much of the past year, and forecasters were still favoring neutral conditions as recently as late spring. Then, within the space of a few months, the system flipped, not gently, violently. The ocean essentially went from cold to hot faster than almost any comparable transition in the modern record, and it kept going like a car that does not just reach the speed limit but keeps pushing past it. Here is what that means practically, and this is the weird part that even the professionals are openly acknowledging. The atmosphere responds to the ocean, but it does not respond instantly, and it does not always respond the same way twice. Think of the atmosphere as a massive, slow-moving machine with a great deal of inertia. It cannot simply snap into a new configuration the moment the ocean warms up. It carries momentum from whatever regime it was in before. The La Nina regime, with its own storm tracks and temperature patterns, and it takes months to fully reorganize. Usually, a strong El Nino eventually produces the textbook response. The southern storm track lights up, the north goes mild, the pieces fall where the history books say they should. But when an event ramps up this fast, the handoff between old pattern and new pattern gets messy. The ocean is already behaving like the peak of a Super El Niño. The atmosphere is still catching up. That mismatch is exactly the kind of situation where a season can deliver something none of the analogs ever saw coming, an epic winter. In a place that was forecast to be boring, or a quiet winter where everyone expected the worst. Before we get to the region by region breakdown, it is worth being honest about what a seasonal forecast can and cannot tell us. Because here's the trap people fall into every time a big El Niño is announced. They expect every single day of the winter to reflect the average. That is not how averages work. A winter that ends up being wetter than average is still made of individual storms and individual dry stretches. A winter that trends mild is still capable of one brutally cold week. The seasonal forecast is a weighted coin, not a weather guarantee. It tells you which outcomes are more likely this season, not which days will be record-breaking. Understanding that distinction is the difference between being genuinely informed and just being scared by a headline. And there is one more thing this forecast cannot do, no matter how good the models get. It cannot tell us where the surprises will land. In 1997, the surprise was that an ice storm, not a flood, not a blizzard, became the event people remember from that winter. In 2016, the surprise was the East Coast, where the subtropical storms collided with cold air at exactly the right moment. The averages tell you the loading. They do not tell you the exact bullet with your name on it. That is the honest truth about seasonal forecasting, and anyone who claims otherwise is overselling you. Let me pause here, because this is important, and I want you to stick with me. The story of this El Niño is not going to be a simple one, and understanding it now is the difference between being surprised by the winter and being ready for it. If you have made it this far, you clearly care about getting this right. So here's my ask. Comment below with your city and your early winter prediction. I want to see, in the comments, who calls it correctly this season. And drop a like, because the more people see this early warning, the more prepared everyone gets. Now let's talk about what forecasters are actually expecting, region by region. Start with the north, across the northern tier of the United States, the Pacific Northwest, the Northern Plains, the Great Lakes into New England. The overall lean in a very strong El Niño winter is milder than average, less bitter cold, fewer big snowstorms chasing each other week after week. For people who hate shoveling, that sounds like good news, but here's the trap. Milder on average does not mean storm-free. It only takes one well-timed surge of Arctic air meeting one juiced-up southern storm to produce a blockbuster event in a place that the seasonal forecast called quiet. The averages are coin flip weighted. In one direction, not a promise. Every winter, someone learns that lesson the hard way. Now go south. If you live in California, this is the perennial El Niño storyline, and it cuts both ways. On one hand, a wet, stormy winter is desperately good news for reservoirs, for snowpack, for a state that has lived through brutal drought cycles. On the other hand, when the storms come that hard and that fast, the hillsides pay the price. Mudslide-prone areas become no-go zones. Burn scars from recent fire seasons turn into flash flood channels. The rain that heals the water supply is the same rain that can tear apart a hillside neighborhood. Both things can be true at once. Down across the south, Texas, the Gulf Coast states, into the southeast, the strong El Niño signal is wetter and stormier than average. And here is the threat that people chronically underestimate about El Niño winters. Cool season severe weather, tornadoes, large hail, damaging winds. In a strong El Niño pattern, the ingredients for severe thunderstorms can come together in December and January and February, the months when most people have mentally packed away tornado season until spring. El Niño does not care about your mental calendar. The 1997 into 1998 winter produced some of the worst tornado outbreaks in Florida history during what should have been the quiet season, twisters tearing through neighborhoods in the middle of what most people thought of as the calmest part of the year. That is the kind of risk these winters hide in plain sight. If you live in the South, the January tornado is not a freak coincidence in a strong El Niño winter. It is part of the pattern. And then there is the East Coast, the Mid-Atlantic, the Northeast. This is the wild card, the region with the highest ceiling and the lowest forecast confidence. In a strong El Niño, the southern storm track is loaded. Storms roll across the Gulf and up the southeast with plenty of moisture and energy. The question is always whether, when one of those storms turns the corner and heads up the coast, there is cold air in place to meet it. In the January 2016 blizzard, every single ingredient came together at the same moment. And that is the thing about these winters. The difference between a forgettable East Coast season and a historic one can come down to the timing of a single storm, a single week, a single cold front. Highly uncertain, totally possible. And impossible to rule out this far out. And what about the Pacific Northwest? The classic strong El Niño signal there is a bit of a mixed bag. Generally drier and milder than average in many areas, especially west of the Cascades, where winter storms that would normally slam into the coast get diverted south instead. Great news for people tired of rain, less great for ski resorts depending on mountain snowpack at low elevations. And again, a mild lean is not a lock. One atmospheric wobble can flip a whole region's season. There is one more piece of geography worth mentioning, and it's easy to forget about because it isn't in the lower 48. Alaska. In strong El Niño winters, Alaska tends to run warmer than average, which matters for snowpack, for sea ice, and for the whole cascade of consequences that flow from an unusually warm northern winter, touching everything from wildlife to shipping to village infrastructure built on frozen ground. So put it all together, and here is the honest picture. A super El Niño of historic strength is building in the Pacific right now. The seasonal dice are loaded, wet and stormy in the south, mild in the north, and a genuine wildcard up the East Coast. December, January, and February could deliver a season that looks a lot like the winter of 2015 into 2016, or the winter of 1997 into 1998, the two most extreme winters of the modern era. Or, because this El Niño has already shown us it does not care about precedent, it could deliver something none of the forecast models are expecting. Let me stop here for a second, because we have reached the part where this forecast gets honest, and honesty in weather forecasting is rarer than you might think. Anyone who tells you they know exactly what a specific region is going to get this winter is selling you something. As of late. August. The seasonal outlooks are probabilities, not promises, and the probability map itself keeps shifting as the models update week after week. The truth is that this El Niño is developing so quickly that even the global forecasting centers are still working out what it means. The forecasts made in July were already outdated by August. Forecasts made in August may be outdated by October. That uncertainty is not a reason to tune out. It is exactly the reason to pay closer attention this year than any year in the last decade. Because every update, every model run, every shift in the ocean temperature is a new piece of the puzzle. And the puzzle matters because the stakes are real. A loaded southern storm track means flood risk. It means mudslide risk. It means severe weather risk in the cool season when fewer people are paying attention. And it means snow risk along the eastern seaboard for anyone unlucky enough to live where a warm storm meets a cold front at exactly the wrong moment. Here's what I am personally watching. The strength of the event, which is already unusual, the speed of its development, which is already historic, and the behavior of the atmosphere, whether it responds the way the textbooks say it should, or whether it keeps doing what it has been doing all summer, which is essentially making its own rules. Every Super El Niño in the modern record has left behind a winter that people talked about for years. The question is not whether this one will make its mark. It is where and in what form and whether we will be ready. One more pause before I bring this home, because you have stayed with me through the whole pattern, and that puts you ahead of most people. Here is my challenge to you. Remember the place you call home and remember this day. In 6 months, when the winter totals are in, come back to this video and tell me if your corner of the map matched the forecast, or if the atmosphere decided to write its own story. That kind of engagement is what makes this channel worth watching. So subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this video with someone who lives along the storm track. Because this is the kind of winter where an early heads up is worth gold. And I want to leave you with one thought. People talk about the weather like it is background noise. Something to check, complain about, and forget. But every once in a while, the ocean and the atmosphere stage a season that reminds us who is really in charge. In 1997, that reminder came as floodwater and ice. In 2016, it came as 3 feet of snow on the streets of Washington. And now in 2026, the engine is warming up again, and every indicator says it is going to be one of the strongest events we have ever measured. Think about how generations remember winters. Nobody gathers around a table in 2036 to talk about the perfectly average winter of 2025. They talk about the blizzard that shut down the Capitol, the week the lights went out, the season the hillsides let go. The winters that get remembered are the ones where the large-scale machinery of the planet aligned in a way that left a permanent mark on ordinary lives. This winter has the machinery. The question is only whether it decides to align. The ocean keeps a ledger for decades. It tallies up the warmth and the energy and the momentum invisible beneath the surface while we go about our ordinary lives. And then, on a schedule only it understands, it demands payment. This winter, that account comes due, not necessarily in the place the forecast maps predict, not necessarily in the shape the models expect, but somewhere, somehow, this Super El Niño will make itself impossible to ignore. The famous forecasters like to say that weather is what you get and climate is what you expect. Maybe the wiser version is this. The atmosphere rarely surprises those who are paying attention. It only surprises those who stopped looking. So keep looking. Keep watching the maps. Keep an eye on the ocean temperatures and the jet stream in the weeks ahead. Because the story is being written in real time and none of us, not the models, not the meteorologists, not me, knows the ending yet. That is the strange and wonderful thing about weather. It is the one force on Earth that can still make everyone, from the most advanced supercomputer to the most veteran forecaster, feel genuinely small. And a Super El Niño winter is the season when it reminds us of that most loudly. If this video taught you something, do me one last favor. Share it with one person who thinks the weather is boring and prove them wrong. Subscribe if you have not already, and drop a comment telling me what the weather is doing in your world right now. The heat, the rain, the smoke, whatever you're living through. I read every single one, and when this El Niño makes its next move, and it will, you will want to know about it here before it arrives at your door. Stay curious, stay dry when it floods, stay warm when it snows, and stay tuned. The winter of 2026 into 2027 is loading up to be one for the record books. Let us make sure we walk into it with our eyes open.